First of all, I'd like to say welcome to the Hall of Ma'at. I'm T. Owens Moore, resident of DeKalb County here in Georgia, colleague of my brother Pierre Carson, who houses a Hall of Ma'at here. Trying to put it on the map to bring information to the people, information to our community that certainly have an impact on where we need to go to be progressive in our society. But we also have to look at those dynamic issues that start to keep us back and do not allow us to proceed on and move on. I titled the topic of discussion today, Ethnic Weapons, Biological Warfare on the Human, and I spelled human H-U-E-M because we're talking about colored people, not as in Negroes, but just people who got melanin. When you think about it, it's really just all types of colored people. That's why I say human, because this really is not isolated to just African people. The United States government, which has been or has been the most powerful nation on the planet, has done things that have been considered to be diabolical. And I put this first little transparency up for a warning because you will be worried after this presentation because of the information that I'm sharing. Some of you may already know about some of it, and I would certainly love to leave the end of this discussion up for open dialogue rather than being a lecture and you hearing something from me. Many of you may have reports and understandings and issues that can share for the community. Yeah, I suggest you leave now, and if your mind cannot comprehend the reality of how a diabolical mind really can function. I mean, we've just come from 9/11 and everybody's all patriotic now, and it's like, oh, America can never be diabolical. America can never, do bad things to its people. That can't exist. America is, we're all patriots. But the reality is that term diabolical does start to relate to our relationship that we have had with Europeans. Diabolic means of the devil or devils. And you start thinking about that and the issues and what Europeans have done to African people worldwide, you start to understand where the Nation of Islam had come up with this thing about the European being the devil. It wasn't so much talking about people being a devil with what horns on their head. No, their behavior, their characteristics. Very wicked or cruel, fiendish, devilish, demonical. Anybody would want to think of how can we create some chemical substance, some biological entity to destroy another person. That's diabolical. African people don't think like that. People outside of the Western tradition don't think like that. But when you start talking about control, domination, people who become megalomaniacs, wanting to control the world and resources, you will do whatever is necessary to control the environment. If we talk about the world's population and the masses or the wealth, the most wealth that's controlled in the world is by a little bit of people, don't you think that little bit of people would do whatever is necessary to keep their hands in the pot? So when we talk about this thing diabolical, we're talking about a nature, a mindset in a people that will really do something to hinder a whole group of people. So that's where we're going to go in terms of our discussion today. There are several documents that really do state the Europeans' involvement in chemical and biological warfare. There are several documents like covert action. I just want to read a few pieces from these documents. What's up, scholars? Some veterans that are coming right in here to the audience, and they would certainly have some impact on what the Army and military has done, so they need to be sitting right up front here. Chemical biological warfare, medical experiments, and population control. Could AIDS be the result of accidental or purposeful biological intervention by the U.S. government against third world nations, North American gay men, or intravenous IV drug users? A look at past and present practices suggests ample precedents. U.S. history is replete with efforts to inflict disease and death on the third world people, both inside and outside U.S. borders, through chemical and biological warfare. medical experiments, and population control. And despite an alleged ban on development of chemical biological warfare weapons since 1969, there is also ample evidence that such programs have continued incorporating the latest techniques in genetic engineering. In addition, the U.S. military has never shown any compunctions about testing chemical biological warfare techniques on the general population in this country. For example, following are some highlights. When I say CBW, I'm speaking of chemical biological warfare, so I can make it shorter. Native American nations. The first recorded instance of U.S. biological warfare was in 1763, when white colonial settlers gave smallpox-infected blankets to Native Americans who sought friendly relations. Many died as a result. This tactic was repeated during the Trail of Tears of the 1800s. So a people extending their hand, opening their home, and these people are going to give them smallpox and blankets to kill them off so what they can then get their land. A mentality, diabolical. Europeans come in and meet the Native Americans. They say, hey, this is a nice place, you know. So the Native Americans share some space with them and give it to them, and Native Americans come back to this place next year, there's a fence up. So what's the fence for? They don't think like that. So there's a whole different mindset we're dealing with here, and if we don't go back to the roots of these issues, we'll never understand the nature of these individuals. Germany and Japan. In World War I, the U.S. joined all the warring parties in using poisonous gases, although to an even greater degree than the others. In World War II, U.S. contingency plans for massive use of CBW against Germany and Japan were avoided by a matter of weeks due to the defeat of the Axis powers. However, there is strong evidence of U.S. use of anti-crop warfare against its two major adversaries. Move on. North Korea. In the Korean War, the first modern U.S. counterinsurgency war, no such limitations were employed. According to an international investigating commission, the U.S. used an array of germ weapons against the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea. Feathers infected with anthrax, lice, fleas, and mosquitoes dosed with plague and yellow fever, diseased rodents, and various implements contaminated with deadly microbes, toilet paper, envelopes, and the ink and fountain pens. Indochina. In the war against Indochina, U.S. CBW reached its zenith. It was the most massive chemical warfare in history. Seeking to destroy crops, supporting the popular guerrilla movements, the U.S. early sprayed 55 million kilograms of defoliants, primarily Agent Orange, on the nations of Indochina. As a result, the ecology of massive areas was destroyed. Millions of people were poisoned, many developed cancer, some died, and the next generation suffered horrendous rates of birth defects. Cuba. Since its 1959 revolution, Cuba has been a prime target of U.S. military, economic, and political attacks. In the 1960s, an anti-crop warfare program was carried out. In 1971, the CIA infected Cuban pigs with African swine fever, a deadly disease. Cuban authorities had to slaughter the entire pig population to stop the disease spread. Let's bring us on home to America. 1950s. The U.S. Navy spread a cloud of bacteria over San Francisco. The Navy claimed the bacteria used in the simulated attack were harmless. But many residents came down with pneumonia-like symptoms, and one died. 1952 and 53, clouds of zinc cadmium sulfide were sprayed over Winnipeg, Manitoba, St. Louis, Missouri, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Fort Wayne, Indiana, and Maryland. Despite claims of harmlessness, a military report noted respiratory problems. 1955, the Tampa Bay area of Florida experienced a sharp rise in whooping cough cases, including 12 deaths following the CIA bio-war test, whose details are still secret, involving bacteria withdrawn from the Army CBW Center. 56 to 58, in the poor black communities of Savannah, Georgia, and Avon Park, Florida, the Army carried out field tests with mosquitoes that may have been infected with yellow fever. And we'll come back to the yellow fever. The insects were released into residential areas from ground level and dropped from planes and helicopters. Many people were swarmed by mosquitoes and then developed unknown fevers. Some died. After each test, Army agents posing as public health officials photographed the tested victims and then disappeared from town. June 7th to 10th, 1966, the Army's Special Operations Division dispensed a bacillus throughout the New York City subway system. The Army's reports on the experiment noted the existence of subways in the Soviet Union, Europe, and South America. 68-69, the CIA experimented with the possibility of poisoning drinking water systems by injecting a chemical substance into the water supply of the FDA, that's Federal Food and Drug Administration building in Washington, D.C. And then one last one. One highly suspicious incident that could bear scrutiny as a possible CBW test is the 1978 mass suicide of 900 black North Americans in Jonestown, Guyana. So we haven't even mentioned the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, have we? 40 years studying syphilis in men, and then if you talk about men, the whole African family being infected, and you're not treating these people. 40 years. So if you think about that, they had to find some information about that. You don't just do studies and not find anything that's going on with individuals. And what I found very interesting is that there was an article called Public Health Then and Now, the Tuskegee Syphilis Study, 1932 to 1972. Implications for HIV education and AIDS risk education programs in the black community. So it's talking about how people have been very hesitant to go with the government for a test and help when you have for 40 years done something diabolical. But the article makes no reference to the fact that syphilis and AIDS could be connected. I have another article that says the syphilis epidemic and its relation to AIDS, meaning that for all those years they were studying syphilis and how it can maybe be disseminated in the community. Does that then set the precedent of, okay, now it's maybe time to release a substance that can shut down people's immune systems? Something called AIDS? For a substance like that just to pop up in the middle of Africa and people not to question that? So this whole Tuskegee experiment may have been just a precedent for what was to come. Because we always have to look at how diabolical minds work, as we even did with September 11th, 2001. Did they do that to set the stage for other things that were to come? And all these things I'm reading, and I keep mentioning the CIA. In the past, when you had Reagan that was the president, it wasn't nothing about Reagan. It was about putting the CIA in the White House. And who was CIA? George Bush. And you come up to this very day. Who's now still in the White House? The Bushes. Information is just being squashed, and we're not really paying attention to things that are happening and occurring around us. So when you start talking about when people do start to ask questions, when people do start to wake up, the powers that be must do whatever they can, and if it means chemical, biological warfare on their own people, it will be done. Okay. There were two things about this past history that I found very revealing, and one was that there are ethnic weapons, things that primarily can affect African people. Thank you. This is an article from People's Daily World called Using CBW at Home and Abroad. It says the entire U.S. chemical and biological warfare program seems more designed for use in the third world than on the plains of Europe. Chemicals will find their role primarily as weapons of desperation by faltering third world regimes against domestic insurgents or foreign invaders. Charles Pillar and Keith Yamato say in their book Gene Wars, and they go on to talk about the bulk of the microorganisms studied and stockpiled include diseases which typically infest less developed areas of the world, including yellow fever, dengue, as D-E-N-G-U-E, dengue fever, Argentinian hemorrhagic fever, Rift Valley fever, plus several types of encephalitis. It says also California Valley fever. This latter disease has been examined as a possible ethnic weapon, a disease which adversely affects certain genotypes. Asians and African Americans are particularly susceptible to valley fever. So keep in mind valley fever. I'm going to come back to that. Another one that has been very, not instrumental, but they've utilized against us. Something called Aspergillus fumigatus. I'll read this for you. In November 1970, Carl Larsson, chairman of the Department of Genetics at Lund University in Sweden, published an article entitled Ethnic Weapons in Military Review, a professional journal for the U.S. Army. The The article caused an uproar in biochemistry circles and set researchers looking at programs Larson had let out of the bag. After chronicling differences among human populations, because remember now today they keep saying we're all the same, you know, can't we all just get along? There's no difference between us. But they've always known we've been different. They've studied that we've been different, and that's how they've utilized things against us. It says, Larson concluded that innate differences in vulnerability to chemical agents between different populations have led to the possible development of ethnic weapons. The Army was well aware of differences in the way that certain populations respond to biological agents. Under contract from the U.S. Navy, the University of California's Naval Bioscience Lab in Alameda, California, carried out extensive tests on a fungus endemic to California's Central Valley. The technical name is coccidiomycosis. We'll just call it valley fever, okay? Carried out extensive tests on this fungus, and the disease spread by wind-blown spores attacks the lungs, can spread into other organs and bones. In this second stage of the disease, it is extremely dangerous with upwards of 50% fatalities. What the University of California discovered was that Asians and African Americans were extremely susceptible to valley fever. Whites were least affected. A study of Kern County General Hospital from 1949 to 76 showed that while African Americans made up only 5% of the population, they represented 59% of the valley fever cases. Moreover, their mortality rate was far higher. The Army had been well aware of this for some time and had even field tested a biological agent directed at African Americans. Congressional hearings in '77 revealed that the Department of Defense had contaminated shoes and naval stores with fungus called Aspergillus fumigatus because it closely resembled valley fever. So now we have a connection between two particular types of agents that affect primarily African Americans, and now we're going to get into some of the maybe more biological aspects of how they do it. The target was unwitting African American civilians employed as dock workers and warehouse men at a naval depot in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. Since Negroes are more susceptible to valley fever than are whites, a Department of Defense official told Congress this fungus disease was simulated by using Aspergillus fumigatus. The spores apparently successfully spread themselves to warehouses, trucks, elevators, and 3 Navy ships. While this fungus is not as dangerous as valley fever, it does cause a lung disease called aspergillosis. Here we say aspergillin in biochemistry terms is a black pigment occurring in the spores of the common bread mold. And you know that's where penicillin comes. So you see, you leave bread out for a while and you don't take care of things, mold develops. So this is what we're talking about. Something like that can be used, then can be spread, and then people can contract. It says, an antibacterial substance obtained from the molds, A. flavus and A. fumigatus, that works effectively against a wide variety of bacteria. So now you have this thing in biochemistry which can be utilized now for so-called assistance and help. However, aspergillosis, which we just talked about, a disease condition caused by an imperfect fungus of the genus Aspergillus, marked by inflammatory granulomatous lesions in the skin, ears, nasal sinuses, lungs, and sometimes bones and meninges. Aspergillus, in terms of fungi talk, a genus of imperfect fungi of the class Hyphomycetes, including species that cause spoilage and diseases. So they know about this. They study this. So now it's a matter of how do they utilize this to affect people. And that's the part that we don't pay attention to in terms of, wow, could somebody really do that against us? So what I did, I wanted to put together a layout of what to talk about, and I want to have this as a checklist to make sure we stay on point. So I wanted to give you background information that this great country has done some things that have been diabolical, discuss texts that are written like a higher form of killing that mention documented evidence of what the government has done against so-called colored individuals, Discuss this valley fever and the Aspergillus fumigatus that we just talked as ethnic weapons. Talk about the syphilis-AIDS connection. Talk about riot control and how many of the things that are used in riot control are things that affect skin. So they've studied us and have used now things that can be used as deterrents. Talk about alcohol, and I think many of us know about malt liquor that's been pretty much pervading in our community, and you wonder why such a potent substance that costs so less is in our communities. Hepatitis C and tattoos, because again we're talking about things that are getting to our systems that we don't necessarily know how they get into our systems. Well, this could be one way. Interferon research, or break that down because that's an immunological substance that has been utilized over time, and we have to look at the origins maybe of the investigation of this because it does relate to African people from a theory coming from a brother named Dick Gregory. And we'll end up and conclude with neurotoxins, that is, things that can actually target the brain, destroy the brain, and basically, if the brain is your unit of functioning, and you destroy that, you've essentially got the person. So we'll conclude by talking about neurotoxins. Are there any questions before I go on about some of the things I've already read? What I find interesting is that some of the places that have been very instrumental in starting this have been not so much common, but you ever heard of Merck Sharp & Dome? Merck makes ProScar. People use that for, I think, some prostate cancer treatments. It's the medication. Merck Sharp & Dome is like SmithKline, Beckman, McNeil Pharmaceuticals. So it's a pretty big firm, pharmaceutical firm, M-E-R-C-K. So Merck was one of the original companies involved in chemical biological warfare. So the Army was looking for someone or some civilian type organization that can be involved in working with the government, because if there weren't any civilians involved, then people would get suspicious to think that the Army is really doing something to attack the people. So they had to somehow get the so-called civilians involved. So Merck Sharp & Dome was one of the original companies. And this is just an article called The Birth of the U.S. Biological Warfare Program, and it just talks about the government's files and who was involved from the beginning. I found much of this very interesting because I worked at Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington, D.C. for about 2-3 years. So I was there as a graduate student, but I'm working in this environment knowing full well that their agenda is to create things for destruction. I mean, that's what the Army is for. Walter Reed Army Medical Center is also the place where the presidents are treated, where certain governmental personnel are receiving their treatments. So it's a pretty secure place. But I noticed that many of the places that have been associated with the creation of these substances of chemical biological warfare came from Fort Detrick, Maryland. Fort Detrick, Maryland is the hub for Walter Reed Army Medical Center. That's where I was getting my paychecks from, Fort Detrick, Maryland. So I started to question, now why am I working up in here if I know full well that I shouldn't be involved in issues, research that may have an impact on us as a people? So I began to do some reading while I was there, and that's when I had an opportunity to really kind of uncover the government's role in some of these serious issues. The search for the ultimate weapon. The military has several times expressed its fantasies for new biological weapons. Some of these images are chillingly suggestive of a microbe that would cause AIDS. So prior to the word and term acquired immune deficiency even coming aboard, there were thoughts about how do you create something that could do that. In 1969, a military official testified before Congress. Within the next 5 to 10 years, it would probably be possible to make a new infective microorganism which could differ in certain important respects from any known disease-causing organism. Most important of these is that it might be refractory, that is resistant to the immunological and therapeutic processes upon which we depend to maintain our relative freedom from infectious diseases. In a book on CBW written just before the identification of AIDS, two authors commented on this testimony. The possibility that such a supergerm may have been successfully produced in a laboratory somewhere in the world in the years since that assessment was made is one which should not be too readily cast aside. This is not an entirely academic speculation. In 1968, Porton Down, the British Army's Biological Warfare Laboratory, and Fort Detrick collaborated in the successful transfer of genes between different strains of plague. The research was done for purely, they say, defensive purposes. It goes on to say that added to all this suggestive evidence is the particular history of the Army's Fort Detrick facility in Frederick, Maryland. It is here some have charged that the Pentagon may have developed AIDS purposefully or accidentally. This center was called the Army Biological Warfare Laboratory until Nixon's 1969 order banning CBW for production. Fort Detrick was then the leading center for development and testing of biological weapons. So we now have the physical evidence that these things were created here, and now you have the governments all worried and concerned about other countries, other militaries, other people getting a hold of something they created. Well, it's inevitable that it could occur, but the point is, there's only one diabolical mind that's ever used it and done it. If you even talk about the nuclear bomb, there's only one diabolical mind that's ever dropped a nuclear bomb. And we're always portraying and talking about other people being the problem, and here we have a diabolical mind here that we're not really paying attention to. These two things, as we try to move on, about the higher form of killing. It's a book written in 1982 by Robert Harris and Jeremy Paxman. It says, A Higher Form of Killing, The Secret Story of Chemical and Biological Warfare. Just a few pieces from it. The San Francisco test was only one of many, talking about documented evidence on and on about how they actually used things and manipulated things in the environment and people weren't really paying attention to. In 1951, American Navy personnel deliberately contaminated 10 wooden boxes with Serratia marcescens and one of the things we just talked about, Aspergillus fumigatus, before they were shipped from a supply depot in Pennsylvania to the Navy base in Norfolk. So this is corroborating the story now from another source of information. The tests were designed to establish how easily disease might be spread among the people employed to handle the boxes at the supply depot. Of the 3 infectious bacteria, this Aspergillus fumigatus had been specifically chosen because black workers at the base could be particularly susceptible to it. Another piece which implicates the Fort Detrick place and kind of talks about Georgia here. It says Fort Detrick scientists discovered a Trinidadian who had been infected with yellow fever in 1954 and had later recovered. So you know Trinidad is African people, right? They took serum from the Trinidadian and injected it into monkeys. From the monkeys, they removed infected plasma, into which they dropped mosquito larvae. The infected mosquitoes were then encouraged to bite laboratory mice and pass on the disease. This ingenious technique of public health research in reverse worked. The mice duly contracted yellow fever. Laboratories were built at Fort Detrick, where colonies of the Egypti mosquitoes were fed on a diet of syrup and blood. They laid their eggs on moist paper towels. The eggs would later turn into larvae and eventually into a new generation of mosquitoes. The Fort Detrick laboratories could produce 500,000 mosquitoes a month, and by the late 50s, a plan had been drawn up for a plant to produce 130 million mosquitoes a month. Once the mosquitoes had been infected with yellow fever, the Chemical Corps planned to fire them at an enemy from cluster bombs, dropped from aircraft and from the warhead of the Sergeant missile. I remember first moving down here in 92. In 92, 93, mosquitoes were just horrible around here. I mean, they were the tiger mosquitoes. They actually had little black and white stripes on them. I don't see the major thrust or contamination of mosquitoes today. And it could be because of a variety of factors, but I'm just looking at that period of time. It wasn't even enjoyable to go out and play. sit out on the deck, go to a cookout, because mosquitoes were everywhere. So you can see how that would be a perfect plan to get people, because you have this contagion in these little organisms that you're not even paying attention. You're just swatting it. You're just swatting it, but little stick and prick, you don't know what then happens in terms of the future with your body. To test the feasibility of this extraordinary weapon, the Army needed to know whether the mosquitoes could be relied upon to bite people. During 1956 that is, they carried out a series of tests in which uninfected female mosquitoes were released first into a residential area of Savannah, Georgia, and then dropped from an aircraft over a Florida bombing range. Within a day, according to a secret chemical corps report, the mosquitoes had spread a disease of between 1 and 2 miles and bitten many people. The effects of released infected mosquitoes can only be guessed at. Yellow fever, as the chemical corps noted, is a highly dangerous disease, at the very least causing high temperatures, headache, vomiting, blah, blah, blah. So this thing about the yellow fever, if you go to any book on microbiology and pathology, happen to read this about this yellow fever and the actual organism that creates it. It says, it is one of the most infectious of the fungus diseases. Now this is an old school book now. I think we might have still been Negroes here. This is 1972, so we're still probably Negroes and blacks here. It says, in the primary form, the lesions are confined to lungs, giving pulmonary symptoms of varying severity. Sometimes there is cavitation in the lungs. As a rule, the infection ends in recovery, but in a small percentage of cases, the process spreads from the lungs to produce the progressive form. This occurs more frequently in Negroes and the more darkly pigmented races than in Caucasians. So you don't just take that lightly. Just because they're saying that does not mean that they're not using that to study, to use as a weapon. In the progressive form, the disease spreads to the skin, subcutaneous tissues, bones, meninges, and internal organs. And what I'll do later is I'll show you actually a molecule which is considered to be the melanin molecule, and you can start to see how by it being an attractant molecule that is taking, receiving, giving a lot of input in the biological system, you can see how then contagions could be attracted to it. Valley fever is endemic to the desert valleys of California and the dry, dusty areas of southwestern United States, especially in Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and part of Mexico. It is most likely that man and animals are infected by the inhalation of spore-bearing dust. And these are real significant things, because if you just even at home on a sunny day, you're sitting in your room, kitchen, anywhere in your house, and you see light coming through the house and the dust particles that are flowing, I mean, that dust is just there everywhere. Imagine spores that can be just released somehow and get into you. Well, that's what we're talking about in terms of these areas where it's primarily existing in these dusty places. There may be a reservoir of infection in small wild rodents, and these animals could pass the spores in their feces to contaminate the soil, after which the spores would be spread by the wind. The rather frequent dust storms of the Southwest might carry these organisms long distances. Do you remember a few years ago in the Midwest they had some rodents that had some disease? I don't know the exact name of it. I don't think this was it. But what was, you don't remember the name of that? It's like these rodent feces.
Wipe out the Indian.
Yeah.
And then they tried to come up with a vaccine
for
the babies, but they infected the vaccine with AIDS.
Man, so that's the thing about, now we have to get to inoculations and start to question that thing. But when things happen and they blow it out of proportion, it might have been planned anyway, just to make people alert of it. But they know exactly what they're doing, because you hype people, get them all alert and get them worried. Hey, now you set them up for what? Vaccinations,
I'm a diabolical.
Right. So you had something, you said you knew the same thing? And that thing about, so that's valley fever. So I'm just mentioning to you that there's documented evidence as to how it can have an impact. I told you about the Aspergillus fumigatus, and that can have a biological impact. Well, these are negative things. This, I think I have one more piece in this one. Yeah. This is just how the CIA may be thinking. In the late 1960s, the descendants of Sidney Lovell's Hellraisers had developed a gamut of chemical and biological devices suitable for every purpose, from disguised assassination to minor harassment. Some were described by former CIA agent Philip Agee in 1975. Horrible smelling liquids in small glass vials can be hurled into meeting halls. Just walk by, throw it in there, and keep on walking. Covert stuff. A fine clear powder can be sprinkled in a meeting place, becoming invisible after settling, but having the effect of tear gas when stirred up by the latter movement of the people. An incendiary powder can be molded around prepared tablets. When ignited, the combination produces ample quantities of smoke that attacks the eyes and the respiratory system more strongly than ordinary tear gas. A tasteless substance can be introduced to food that causes exaggerated body odor. And a few small drops of clear liquid stimulate the target to relax. And a few small drops of a clear liquid stimulate the target, that is the person, to relaxed, uninhibited talk. Meaning that you can probably make a person do things that they wouldn't necessarily do. And generally, that's what you think about alcohol. It's a depressant, but it causes inhibition where you start saying things you know you shouldn't be saying under that alcohol. Invisible itching powder can be placed on steering wheels or toilet seats. And a slight smear of invisible ointment causes a serious burn to skin on contact. Chemically processed tobacco can be added to cigarettes and cigars to produce respiratory ailments. Talking to students, because when you ever talk about psychopharmacology, drugs, and all that stuff in class, they always got to talk about marijuana, because I don't know if they're doing it or not. But they talk about all these things now with chemicals that have been put in marijuana, and to either make it stronger or give a different effect. But you start talking about putting things in cigarettes, cigars, tobacco items, which then has a long-term impact, and that's why with that last piece, neurotoxins, over a long period of time, you start talking about having detrimental effects on the body's, adaptability. This thing about creating hype and getting people to think about, we got to get immunes, inoculated, vaccinated. This was an article in Time magazine about using technology for microchips, where they can put the little guy in the middle, has a little teeny chip in his hand that can be inserted in the body, and that chip can be used to monitor health, from sugar levels if you have diabetes, to maybe if you have some other hormone in your body that's imbalanced. This chip could be set up to test how that information is being distributed in your body. Also, maybe your Social Security number can be put on there, and they can track you where you go. And I found this pretty devastating, because when we talk about inoculations, the whole thing about smallpox vaccines. In the middle of Africa, the whole story, as many of you which should be educated to know already about, that was the impetus at the beginning as to how they got into the middle of Africa shooting people up, giving them smallpox vaccines. So people were saying that inside that vaccine may have been this virus that contaminated the individuals, and that's how it spread like that. I found this devastating, really, to even think about this in inoculations. I was just feeling my arm the other day, and 2 little bumps right here. Could be just from the, needle that goes in as a child. I mean, I haven't been inoculated since I've been an adult. The point is, as a child, 2 little bumps. I don't know if you even check out your arm if you got little bumps. It might just be the tissue from the injection, but it's quite obvious that things could be going on daily without us even knowing it, where they could put things in your body and you don't even know. So you wonder how somebody could bomb that, Oklahoma? Was it Timothy McVeigh bombed that place? And they found the fool a couple of days later? Was they tracking them? So the fact that they can't find certain individuals, but they can find some, you start to wonder, how does that happen? So we have to really be concerned about these inoculations and immunizations, even with our children that are growing up. And this whole thing about immunizations, we don't have an immune system, because we're not immune from nothing. We have a defense mechanism system. So we can probably give our bodies what it needs through our diet and nutrition to fight against things in defense. So these inoculations can be kind of dangerous. The polio virus has been something very significant for inoculations, meaning that it has helped to deter it. The polio virus enters the body just like AIDS does. So there's some connections between, again, all these inoculations, what they did in terms of studying that syphilis. Just trying to make the connections here. The 40 years of studying syphilis, what we know about as AIDS came along, and creating mass hysteria sometimes to make people want to get inoculated. And with African people being, I guess, the more gullible than others, we certainly get caught up in some things that aren't necessarily to the best of our interest. This riot control, skin irritants, just a small piece on that. Riot control agents are basically peripheral sensory irritants. I mean, if you want to get some people, you know, you get their eyes and skin, you make them real irritated so what they ain't fighting back against you. So if they're studying the skin here, you know they're probably studying melanin and pigmentation because that's something that's very attractant to molecules. Peripheral sensory irritants are substances that pharmacologically interact with sensory nerve receptors in skin. Some chemical warfare agents include agents that are blister agents, that is, actually makes blisters form on your body. Choking agents, lung irritants, blood agents, incapacitating agents. And if they know that they're going for certain populations sometimes, perhaps they use certain kinds of chemicals specifically targeted to that kind of people. So if we know that skin melanin has been studied for several years and still is, they have to have much evidence about how you can make those individuals' systems shut down quicker than other people's. If we know through these other diseases like valley fever and what is created from Aspergillus fumigatus, you know darn well that there's some ethnic variations now in the biology of people. This piece on alcohol and malt liquor. Has anybody ever questioned why we have malt liquor as a substance for us to consume?
Yeah. You notice that they advertise that all the time on B103 and black stations, but you never hear it on white stations like GSP or WSB. You never hear anything about malt liquor.
And the word is never, huh?
Never.
Never.
Because you hear it every 5 minutes on B103.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's been a question in my mind from day one.
Malt liquor, okay.
I remember back in high school, 9th and 10th grade, when country club and Colt 45 came out. Some of my partners, we really experienced with it. And, you know, and I found out today that they're still projecting it right in the black neighborhood. This was in the early 60s. Those particular two malt liquors I know in John that we was experimenting with.
Right.
You know, as to where the regular premium, you know, we want to get on up.
So the thing is, you hear on the commercials, just normal TV, basketball games, light beer commercials. And it's usually marketed to white people. But they got the hard stuff, malt liquor, marketed to us. There were some problems with a drug, or a drug, but a chemical about maybe 8 years ago called Cisco, C-I-S-C-O, and I guess it's probably still in the stores. It's like a wine drink that has 20% volume alcohol in it. It was creating these rambunctious feelings in these children where they were just doing some wild things and not killing one another, but doing some very bizarre acts. So a partner of mine stated, you know, when I was working at Walter Reed, we need to somehow start taking our research and information to the people. Because here I am studying animals in a laboratory context, but not having any relevance to the experience that's going on with us as a people. So it's like, how can we somehow use the malt liquor study or information about it to look at it, how it's affecting people biologically? Well, as I just started reading some information about what's in these substances, it really doesn't tell you what's in these substances. But if you look at Wild Eyes Rose, Mad Dog 2020, those cheap wines that are in our communities, and you start looking at some of those things that are also in those wine drinks, it says contains sulfites, S-U-L-F-I-T-E-S, sulfites. Sulfites are used as preservatives, even dried fruits, I think, have sulfites for preservatives. But sulfites aren't supposed to really be in your body. There's something called sulfite oxidase deficiency that exists in people. That's a problem. Sulfite's okay, something that shouldn't be in your body. Oxidase. Anytime you see a word that has ASE on the end of it, it's referring to an enzyme. So if you say sulfite oxidase, it's what? An enzyme that breaks down sulfites. So if you even got the wine stuff in your body and you're drinking it, okay, you at least have something in your body that can break it down. If it ain't there, you're going to get really drunk or really sick. So if you have a deficiency of that, you're going to have a problem consuming that type of substance. Now let's look at people who have a deficiency of that without even understanding or talking about alcohol as a consumption. In chapter 10 of Dark Matters, Dark Secrets, I wrote, physiologically, there is a severe problem with consuming the different types of alcohol that are marketed to low-income African Americans. For example, the cheap wines which just mentioned contains sulfites. Long-term consumption can potentially lead to neuropathological damage. What does neuro mean? N-E-U-R-O, neuro, brain. Pathological disease, tissue starts to die. For instance, McDonald and Johnston in 1990 have reported on the role of excitatory amino acids in developmental neurological disorders. Excitatory amino acids are something that the body does need to stimulate activity, so something you do need. An example of excitatory amino acid would be something like glutamate. And you heard of glutamate from maybe, I guess, Chinese food. Some people say no MSG, monosodium glutamate. Well, it's giving some people headaches, so it's stimulating things. So some people can't have it in their food. So that's what we're talking about with glutamate. In fact, there is a metabolic amino acid disorder called sulfite oxidase deficiency, and it is fatal in childhood. The disorder is characterized by widespread neuronal injury and destruction, mental retardation, and cerebrospinal fluid levels of this enzyme this chemical called sulfocysteine. The effects of sulfite oxidase deficiency are indirectly related to our discussion, since the effects of high sulfite levels from alcohol consumption may produce similar mental disturbances and neuropathologic damage. So what we're saying here is that this chemical should not be in the body. Like I'll hold it up. Sulfocysteine is not normally present in the body, and this abnormal metabolite is the result of a deficiency of the enzyme sulfite oxidase in brain and peripheral organs. Orally consuming sulfites in alcoholic drinks can elevate the sulfocysteine to dangerous levels and mimic the neuropathological changes that we talked about earlier. Besides sulfites, consumers would need to ask what other ingredients are in the potent beverages that are marketed directly to African Americans. And believe it or not, they don't have ingredients on those bottles. And that was the big thing about that chemical Cisco in the past. It was produced out of somewhere in New York, and the individuals refused to put what's in the ingredients. And so for me, that would certainly shed light on the fact that we're being manipulated, because, I mean, if I said, is there a substance called Fat Boy malt liquor? You would probably say, I ain't like creating nothing goes to Fat Boy malt liquor. That can't be. Fat Boy malt liquor. Premium malt liquor, got a double XL on it, 40 ounce. No, I stole this, I bought this from the store to keep on, not ice, but in a bag to keep showing people that this stuff really exists. They are marketing things that are certainly ethnic in nature, and this stuff is probably destructive. But look how easy it is to consume. I mean, nice, easy handle bottle. How much alcohol? Doesn't say, but most malt liquors have more than 6% alcohol. Normal beers have like 4 to 6% alcohol, so this is at the high extreme. But the point is, the level of marketing that goes to putting things in our systems that you know darn well aren't necessarily positive for us. Why not a 40 ounce of water? You know? They ain't got 40 ounces of light beer, do they? But a 40 ounce of malt liquor. So my question is, or statement is, for us to pay attention to actually the things that are in these substances But really, not consume them at all. You know what I mean? Just get rid of them. Don't even think about consuming them. So, going down our checklist, next piece I wanted to talk to you about was hepatitis C. And that's because of it being, again, another organism that can get into our bodies and not know how it got there. I mentioned examples from the readings. Things could be puffed in the air. Things could be spread on toilet seats. Things could be put on doorknobs. You scratch your head, eye, put something in you, and now it's in your system. Diabolical. So we start talking about hepatitis. There are really three forms: hepatitis A, hepatitis B, and now there's this thing called hepatitis C, which they're considering to be a stealth virus. Over 3 million Americans are infected with the stealth virus. Most don't know it. Stealth. What does stealth mean to you? Hidden. Can't even see it. Don't even know. Because it might not happen and come out until a couple of years later. Yes?
Hepatitis B has been developed during the Vietnam War with the Agent Orange.
Agent Orange?
Yeah. Like now, the veterans are being asked to come in and serve in Vietnam.
Right.
Take a physical to get paid. And then you're right, it affects the organs at all time high.
So breaking that down, because they do have military veterans are the best people to be studied, because they have to keep coming back for what checkups.
Yeah.
Black men who ain't in the military, shoot, we don't go to the doctor. So it's hard to keep track of them, but those in the military, okay, now we can start to measure over the years maybe how much has been accumulated in their bodies. So hepatitis itself, the itis means inflammation. Hepa relates to liver, so it really is like a liver problem, hepatitis, liver disease. Unlike the A virus, which spreads via fecal matter, or the B virus, which passes easily between sex partners, the C virus can't spread unless a carrier's blood enters another person's veins. So now a different way for this organism to be carried on and transmitted.
Needles?
Right, needles is one way. But as this article is being written, it's just talking about how now normal this thing is. It affects bus drivers, construction workers, and even soccer moms. Now, no, you can't get any more diverse than construction workers, soccer moms, bus drivers, African people, European, Asians. All these people are contracting this substance. So how could it be? What's going on? You always hear about this woman, Pamela Anderson, who's some actress on Baywatch. People talk about her. She said that she believes she contracted the hepatitis B virus from receiving a tattoo. Now, I don't have a tattoo. I don't suggest people getting tattoos. I don't body pierce. I don't suggest people to get body pierce. Because what other easy way could you see to distribute something to someone's body than to do something diabolical under those situations? Health workers with a history of accidental needle sticks are also at risk. So today in the laboratory, you have to finish with a syringe, you put it into a little box, clip off the needle, and that falls into a box, a container, and you throw the syringe away. So there's now safety mechanisms, there's now precautions to inhibit that needle prick and stick happening and occurring. It goes on to say, because, and this is, the issue here is April 22nd, 2002, so we're right on point. Didn't have time to make any copies to put them on transparency for you, but I'll just read through it for you. Question?
Oh, my thing about that tattoo to special people that, and I don't know how to pass down the truth, but especially people that call themselves in a Christian mentality. As far as your Bible concerned, it states, I think, in Deuteronomy about tattoos and piercing is definitely prohibited. Yeah. And now they've moved, if you go in certain areas in the city, they've moved tattoo shops into our communities.
Okay.
And nobody's not paying attention, but everybody want to be that mentality of religious, and it's killing us too.
So when I read a little bit of the affected populations, we'll kind of put that in perspective as what you said about where it's at and where the populations are that are maybe receiving these. Because a small amount of blood can harbor a large dose of virus, I mean, just a little teeny amount, and you can start to see viruses just in a little teeny, a speck that you can't even see in your finger. but a whole lot of virus can exist there. So if you're not cleaning things properly, in terms of what you're using to pierce ears, to pierce belly buttons, wherever other places people get pierced, in tattoos, if you're not cleaning this stuff properly, people can get infected. So even a nearly sterile syringe can easily spread the infection. So did inoculation programs spread the virus among soldiers in Vietnam? Are tattoo pens spreading it today? Both are reasonable suspicions, but neither has been validated, and despite years of controversy, neither has been proven. Health officials and university scientists are pursuing the tattoo question and drawing opposite conclusions. No one denies that contaminated tattoo needles could spread hepatitis C, or that clean needles could infect people if used with contaminated tubing or inkwells. In a study published with 626 people for hepatitis C, they questioned them about different possible risk factors. Drug use was the strongest predictor, but tattoos were in the same league, causing a 6-fold increase in risk. And because tattooing was more prevalent than drug use, the researchers concluded that it actually accounts for more cases. People thinking of having their bodies pierced or tattooed should look for the highest standard of infection control. Anything that pierces your skin can transmit a bloodborne infection. And two final pieces on this. One is with this the affected areas. If there's any way to look at this on the camera here, affected groups, and I'll try to break it down for you to put in your mind. On one axis it has the percentages, 1 up to 5%. It says by age and gender. It says going across the board from ages 6 to 11 all the way up to 70 plus. In the middle you see most people are being affected. Well, those are the people that are what? Going through the ear piercing, going through what? Tattoos. Men are primarily more affected. Well, again, not solely relating this just to tattooing and piercing, because again, you're talking about IV drug use. We're talking about other ways, but you look at the people that are involved. Men, primarily. You look at all these brothers getting their ears pierced. I mean, I don't have my ear pierced, and I never could really understand the reasons for that. And I'm not dissing anybody for wanting to have an ear pierced. But the point is, look at these numbers here, and brothers getting pierced ears, and now you got white people getting pierced ears. You got now people piercing everything: nose, penises, stomach, belly buttons. The other one, by age and race, from 1988 to 1994. So you got a maroon and a blue line. On this one you got a maroon, blue, and an orange line. The orange line is the lowest. Again, you got by percentage and by age. The white is the lowest. The Mexican American, not as bad, but in the high extremes of age 60, they start to encounter this hepatitis C. African Americans, off the chart, in the middle. So when you start talking about what's in our community, you see the brothers on TV, all of them wearing tattoos. So what are then the people who are watching them do? They emulate them. I want to get a tattoo.
Michael Jordan.
Right. So you didn't see, he wearing a pierced ear. So then everybody wears pierced earrings. You see the little kids wearing pierced earrings. Why would a little kid need to have a pierced ear? Again, I'm not saying that you shouldn't. I'm just talking about the realities of what could happen and occur by doing something that's not needed. And if you think about the tattoo issue, tattoo, I guess, provides color, right? Uniqueness. We don't have a problem with color and uniqueness because we got all kinds of colors and uniqueness. Europeans have been really involved in that tattoo stuff because they used to tattoo the whole body, and they still do, rather. So we kind of picked up on doing those kinds of things, but tattooing has not been a part of our reality. But the point I'm trying to make is, studies have shown that we are what? At the high extreme of contracting some things like this hepatitis C. Question?
Yeah, the tattoo as far as enjoyment and the influence about the small kids, they just don't know, but the influence of the parents or the guidance, it's been misinformed or figures, all right, it's a Caucasian thing, it's all right for Negroes.
Yeah.
And with the kids, man, they don't know the long-term effect that it's going to have on the parents or the guidance.
Right.
And a lot of them may have some kind of disease where that will come in conjunction with it to offset anything that they may never know about.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying by we don't know when and how things have gotten to our bodies if we're doing things at a very young age,
Yeah.
and then it affects you later on when you get older. Yes?
I have a question. Besides the use of try not to use those, the clippers that are being transported from me. They spray it with some type of a chemical. As soon as they spray it, they brush off with the brush. It needs to be sterilized. How long does it take for that bacteria to be cleaned and sterilized before it goes on to the next individual? And I think that's a great source of transmission.
Okay, a point that certainly I would have overlooked. And you know how you start, when you see people that are presenting information on health, nutrition, diet, something dealing with information like this, you check them out, see where they're at. Well, I cut my own hair. So I'm out of that loop to actually know what really happens in the dynamics of a barbershop. But that's real in terms of if I have my wife trim up the back of my neck, oh, that was too tight, oh, that cut me. That means whatever's on that clipper could then get in me. So that's a very serious question, but like I said, I'm out of that realm of seeing the barbershop routine. But like you said, just another way it could be transmitted. One of the other ways is also blood transfusions. If people are ill and sick, getting transplanted, or they got in an accident and they need blood. I mean, transfusions are also another way. But I want to move on to this piece of how they've also been trying to help out to get rid of hepatitis C. And it's to use something called interferon. It says when this guy who was this big fireman, this big strong guy, got this hepatitis C, it basically knocked him out. And he was taking this stuff called, when he got his diagnosis in 1977, interferon was still being used by itself. And it really did not make him feel too well. Interferon is a immunological substance like interleukin, some immunological molecules that the body creates to fight like cancers. I mean, our bodies really have everything it needs. You can take herbs to stimulate those things. But no, we're taking down some fabricated things from a so-called doctor that can enhance that. So what I'm saying is this interferon piece now takes us again back to the African American community. I want to play a little piece from, it's about a 5-minute piece from Dick Gregory, putting us into context about this whole interferon discussion. Okay? Bear with me. And it's about the Atlanta child murders. Anybody have any thoughts on that prior to me playing this tape?
Conspiracy.
So, brother up front said conspiracy. Yes?
I heard that they were kidnapping the children and removing particular glands from them.
Okay, so
I don't know the truth. I wasn't here at that time, and that it was blamed on the Wayne Williams and stuff.
Okay.
But they were extracting things from them, and that when they found the children, they found them very aged and different.
okay. So body parts, organs, conspiracy, anything else that came to mind? I mean, really nothing has been set in stone as to why and who are the culprits, right? So I just wanted to play something again related to Brother Gregory's thoughts.
Who is responsible for the deaths in Atlanta? Many theories have surfaced. Probably the most controversial theory is the one put forth by political activist Dick Gregory.
All the black children down in Atlanta. Well, why don't you just stop and say, wait a minute, sir, the Klan ain't never had a pattern of going through my neighborhood killing black children. The fascists in this country ain't never had a pattern of going through this country killing black children. Black men ain't never had a pattern of going through the neighborhood killing black children. Who is it? Got to be government. They've had patterns of doing crazy. 40 years ago, this government had to admit now that they injected syphilis in Tuskegee, Alabama, and 600 black men, like the Klan, to go. On the false pretense they were stepping out of coal shop over there. The CIA has been forced to admit that they practiced germ warfare in the New York subway. They've been forced to admit they practiced germ warfare in the whole city of San Francisco. So this government has a pattern of doing what is that? Now the pattern is very interesting in Atlanta. First, out of 17 boys, all but one is exceptional students. Very bright. Now the Klan can't walk through my neighborhood street. Right, because basically all niggas is dumb. I don't know black folks that can walk 3 in the afternoon and 5 in the afternoon. Whoever's doing it is so cool and got it so together, they don't even have to wait for nighttime to fall. I spoke at the National Institute of Health the other day, and I accused them of being the National Institute of Death. I'll be honest, the article that AP ran across the country where I accused them of killing, I didn't say that. I said the pattern is of such that they should be checked. The Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, Georgia, that center has been in on the investigation since day one. Since when do they investigate murders? But the answer that they gave me, I am not going to buy. They said the reason they got involved because they wanted to see if it was a pattern so they could point the black community. The first time you got in was just one day, and the hell you know we're going to need a pattern unless you knew more than one was going to be wiped out. And you white folks better get concerned too. Because if they decide to go down there and wipe out blacks, then that same group come in white neighborhoods start wiping out whites and leading you believe I'm doing it, leading me believe you doing it, and they got to put it out. There's a new game in town. If you check the stock market in New York City, last Friday, a new stock went on the market called biogenetics. And they never had a company sell as much stock in one day as that company did because the new game in town is cell manipulation, baby. That's the new money. And when you deal with that, you got to find somebody to manipulate. Now, I don't know what they're doing in Atlanta, but I know what I'm seeing it don't look right. And I know when I go to Washington, D.C. and say that there's a possibility that the government might be involved, I said it's Monday at 12 noon, and Monday night they claim they got the first break in the case. Those black dudes that's supposed to be in jail in Florida, supposed to know something about it. Well, I don't know, but if I had the head investigation, I would start first dealing with that new thing for curing cancer called interferon. Costs $22 billion a pint. And it's made from blood. But you gotta get a whole lot of blood. 90,000 quarts of blood will only give you like 3 grams of interferon. With sickle cell, because I wanted to know why would this racist government give black folks $175 million to check out sickle cell when most niggas I know ain't never been to a sickle cell funeral in their life, and the things that's killing you, they don't even act like they exist. Well, UCLA did the research and they found out something that's very interesting. The new game in town is a new thing called interferon. It sells for $22 billion a pint. And the worst form of cancer they can cure. They found out that you can make it best by injecting an infection into a mouse, his brains. But then they found out that the interferon that's made from mice can only be used for mice, that's made from dogs can only be used from dogs, that's made from humans can only be used for humans. This is where UCLA comes in. UCLA did the research and found out the best interferon that you can make on this planet for humans have sickle cell in the blood. Now they got you black folks believing something's wrong with sickle cell. It's not. Sickle cell anemia is something wrong with. Sickle cell is what all non-white folks is born with in ourselves to protect us against malaria. Sickle cell anemia comes from that old ratty garbage diet that you eat. Now, the best interferon comes from blood with sickle cell in it, and you take the needle and you draw it out the head of the penis of little bitty boys from the age of 5 to 17. That's the pattern in Atlanta. $22 billion a pint. Now, I bet one day, and the truth come out, and the truth gonna come out on this one, because there's enough people praying. There's enough people that's serious about this. And you find out it has nothing to do with race, it's got something to do with greed. And if the best interferon could be made from 35-year-old red-haired white women, they'd be snatching theirs.
So just wanted to play that piece to let you know that things happen in progression. we get caught up in the day, in the event, and really can't look at things in the past and how it's all connected. So the white man sometimes puts things right in front of us and we can't even pay attention to it, don't even see it. So Dick Gregory's been on point for years. One of my colleagues sitting up front here said, you know, when Cynthia McKinney came out talking about Bush needs to be checked to see if he knew about what was going on with that September 11th, well, where'd she get some of the information from? Well, Brother Dick Gregory. So he's like, well, here you getting ready to talk about this ethnic weapons, you're going to put Dick Gregory there again. It's like they're going to target you now, you know? Because they know they have to, Cynthia McKinney talking about she's coming up with some bizarre information. She's just asking questions. You don't want people to ask questions? No, not if you're trying to control and dominate the world. Not if you're diabolical, like we talked about at the very beginning of this discussion. So as we get to this last piece, dealing with neurotoxins, things that get the brain. Turn the light on? I don't necessarily need to. What I want to talk about here is, again, how people who sit around making these decisions, I mean, these are white men making many of these decisions about what the world needs best. Here they are, the most destructive mentality on the planet, and they're trying to decide what the world needs. So when we start talking about control, manipulation, and how they're using this chemical and biological warfare, it gets pretty devastating. You heard of Castro. They've been trying to get Castro by using chemical biological warfare. You heard of Patrice Lumumba. The movie just came out about his life and times, but it'd be nice if we read about him rather than worrying about an HBO movie about it, but you get the point there. They tried to assassinate him. So you got documented evidence and books talking about how these individuals are sitting around plotting and planning. The higher form of killing, it says, in the United States, some evidence at least is available to suggest the sort of uses to which clandestine chemical or biological weapons might be put. There were numerous planned attempts on the life of Fidel Castro using chemical or biological devices. So why would he even trust America? I mean, why would you want to go to a meeting when you know somebody's trying to kill you? That's why it's great to have Farrakhan with the support around him. Brother what? Khalid Muhammad didn't have support around him. Maybe something happened to him. Took him on out. Amos Wilson didn't have support around him. Maybe something happened to him. Took him out. If you look at all the warriors that have come before us, Asante Shakur living in Cuba. Well, she went out rather than being taken out. It says botulinum toxin pills were prepared to be spilled into Castro's food. Cigars were contaminated with the same poison. Plans were laid to contaminate his rubber diving suit with spores causing a chronic skin disease. Probably the same stuff we're talking here because we're talking about things that affect the human. Castro said he's for African people. You know what I mean? He was the one fighting in Angola. He was the one going to the African countries to assist. It wasn't America. America was going in to jacket the place up. There were even plans to dust his shoes with a chemical which would cause his beard to fall out. So it was speculated, ruining his revolutionary appeal. None of these schemes came to anything, although in 1960 another poisoning operation came to closest to success when the CIA went after Patrice Lumumba, the radical prime minister, of the Congo, now Zaire. 6 months after independence, Sid Gottlieb, the man who had slipped LSD into Frank Olson's after-dinner drink, was sent to Kinshasa with a supply of poison. Much to his frustration, Gottlieb was unable to find a way of getting the poison into Lumumba's body, and the plan was abandoned. But they killed him anyway. By any means necessary, you want to go against the enemy. Last two pieces. In Chemical Warfare Agents, Toxicity at Low Levels, one of the newer books I have in my arsenal, 2001. Talks about cyanide. You heard of cyanide because that's something devastating. No, man, don't touch cyanide. It'll kill everybody. One little drop, boom, you're all gone. Non-lethal chronic exposure to cyanide can lead to neurological problems. Some neurodegenerative diseases are associated with chronic cyanide treatment. More recently, Hobson and others have noted a direct relationship between use of calcium cyanide dust and Parkinsonism in beekeepers. Okay, just working around some bees, just working around this substance, and they just happen to be contracting Parkinson's disease. Now, what is Parkinson's disease? It's a disorder of a part of the brain called the substantia nigra. What is substantia nigra? Black substance. neuromelanin in the brain. These cells produce a chemical called dopamine. If the cells are not functioning, no dopamine is being produced, you develop what? Tremors. Your movement is inhibited. Someone says to go sit down, you can't actually go sit down. You try to walk, it's called festination, you're shuffling. You can't articulate your points.
That's Muhammad Ali, right? That's what he had?
So, they say Muhammad Ali has Parkinson-like symptoms. Okay. So the deal is, man, you mean there are chemicals that could do that? So they had, this is a book called Neurotoxic Factors in Parkinson's Disease and Related Disorders. Certainly not going to read any passages from it or read any documents from it, but it talks about MPTP, isoquinolines, catecholamine oxidase pathways, beta-carbolines, pesticides, metals. Basically it's talking about things in the environment we can ingest, get into our bodies, go to this area, shut it down, and no longer functions properly. Okay? This first thing, MPTP, methyl parahydrotetrapyridine, whatever. Some chemical white kids were taking out in California. They create some synthetic drugs so they can get high. You know how the story goes. But these 20-year-olds were developing Parkinson's disease. So it led to some relationship between some element in the environment causing Parkinson's disease. Now we know that Parkinson's disease is primarily, even though black people get it, Europeans primarily suffer from it. So in the brain, melanin is functioning just like it does on the outside to keep us looking young, to keep our bodies looking fresh and viable. But the more the toxic stuff is accumulated, you have a problem. Even in the brain, you got a problem. So the thing about neuromelanin in the brain is that if it's absorbing these things, over long term, it's going to have an impact. But these kids were 20 years old, developing Parkinson's disease. My point about this is Muhammad Ali was the baddest brother on the planet. They call him the greatest, don't they? The brother could beat, kick, knock any white, black man's body, but the brother would talk about it. He was somebody to be feared, especially if you're talking about a people that could lead another people. And he gonna go be, what, in the Nation of Islam? Who was he? Put him in jail. Take his belts away. The baddest brother on the planet. How could he be silenced like that? I know a whole lot of boxers that got hit more than he did. I'm talking about pugilistic. You can get Parkinson's disease from getting hit in your head. I know a whole lot of people got hit in the head more than he did. So if you're talking about these neurotoxic substances, putting somebody's drink, if he's working out, maybe painting some things on the cabin, metabolism's up, things get into his body, and you're talking about over time, devastating. So there's no way I can prove that, right? But the evidence is there as to why something like that would happen. Speed bag, powder, right? Powder, the stuff just bouncing off of it and coming in, you know, all types of ways. If we know the mind is diabolical, shut that Negro up. The baddest brother on the planet. So I'm going to leave y'all and we're going to open up question and answers. But hope y'all got some from this information.
Since you was talking about Muhammad Ali and the boxing world in general, I've covered a lot of the boxing stuff right here in Georgia and other places from the Golden Gloves and up. And I've had an opportunity to meet some of the greatest, even Ali. And what I noticed in particular, being around Joe Frazier, Ken Norton, Aaron, I can't think of his last.
Aaron Pryor?
Who?
Aaron Pryor?
Yeah. What I noticed about being in conversation with these guys and drumming, and especially what I noticed with Joe Frazier and Ken Norton, for the times that they've been hit in the head, they don't come close to what's happened to Ali, and I just sit there and listen at them, even though, you know, the speech is down to an extent where you can tell, but you don't know if it's coming from that. And what I noticed that for Ali to get hit in the head less, it had to be something to really don't have his brother when he get in his late 40s, 50s, and 60s. He cannot be talking.
And he was the epitome of health. You know the brother as a Muslim was eating right, doing what he's supposed to do.
Yeah.
Meditating, praying.
Yeah, and I look at this commercial that him and Michael J. Fox, I don't know why they made that damn commercial, man.
I didn't see it.
You seen it? Yeah.
They're both on it?
You can't tell what Michael J. Fox got now. But you can see where Ali's situation is.
Yeah. So I just want to bring it to your attention that things like that can really happen because people can be diabolical and cause that. That's what I want to bring to your attention to make sure you're aware of. Yes.
Oh, man. What an experience. You know, I have been inspired, and it's not
Good.
like you've been saying anything new to me.
Okay.
You know, I come from a school that really subscribes to the conspiracy theory. You know, and being from the so-called Africa.
I hear you.
You know, I have been a victim of it myself in so many ways. You know, you can't even begin to imagine.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I remember when I was in my primary school and we were told to line up so they can give us the inoculation. And I ran for 2 weeks. I wouldn't want to be inoculated by some strangers that didn't look like my parents.
Man.
These were all white folks, you know.
It's
With their
devastating.
white garments, and they had this machine and they were just pumping stuff in our armpit, you know. I mean,
I hear you. Our shoulders, yeah.
shoulders, exactly. You know, and it was really frightening.
Yeah.
You know, and I remember telling my dad, I was 6 years old. I said, Dad, how are you sure these people are not giving us diseases? You know, and they looked at me like, you're going crazy. I said, but this is scary. You know, they brought this thing and they just shooting that stuff down your shoulder.
Yeah.
You know, today on the face of this earth, whenever you go out there to get, what's it called, a blood work to check if you have a TB, 99.9% of Africans come out positive.
For tuberculosis?
Yes. Now, what is their justification for us coming out positive? They told us, and this is a fallacy, I believe, that the reason we come out positive is because most Africans are infected with TB, and by being in contact with them, you become infected.
Right.
You know, and I know that's baloney with cheese.
Right. But ethnically, it can relate to those
Exactly.
ones we just talked about, which are highly tuberculosis related.
Exactly.
So it may not be that you have tuberculosis, but you have what the so-called entities within your body that look like that.
Exactly.
Our bodies are not the same as Europeans. You know what I mean? So to go get medically tested, and all these drugs they're using, from antipsychotics to antidepressants, and the medications they're using on them, may not necessarily be for us. Because the system is different, physiologically. I told you I wanted to show you the melanin molecule, which many of you probably seen before. But as I said on the radio, as a carbon-based substance, it has multiple layouts, which makes it a really, really indestructible element, but a lot of things can be attracted to it. Can you flip that light down for me, please? Alcohol, methamphetamines, LSD, antipsychotic drugs like Thorazine, Haldol, pesticides, we just talked about. So people who work in, tomato plants or places where there's a lot of agriculture and sniffing that stuff, eventually they may succumb to Parkinson's disease. Opiates, cocaine, all these things can be absorbed by melanin and making it a different experience. Or if it's there too long, having impact at a later time in life. So there's some drugs that we don't necessarily need to do. White folks love the amphetamines and quaaludes and them things that are upper. We don't need that. If anything, we already high. We need something to chill us out. Something to, what's it, the cognac people drinking now? And what's all this stuff? Crystal, whatever. We need other things that chill us out. Oral history of the Vietnam veterans. Wallace Terry talked about, the white people in there killing folks up and cutting off ears, making necklaces out of them and stuff, and doing drugs to boost them up. Africans in that experience didn't need that.
Since you hit on that about the Vietnam War.
Speak a little louder to them late on tape. Go ahead.
During the 60s, the Prime Minister of Vietnam then made a statement in a book called Dope and Company, and it was in black and white and other books, that we're going to grow the best poppy to demoralize the American GI soldier.
Poppy, as in like poppy seed?
Poppy, yeah.
Heroin?
Yeah. To demoralize us. That was one of their interests, and I always had an interest in the Americans are paying them to do this or to influence them to do this.
Man. When they say demoralize, do you know what they were saying at that point? What were they talking about? To just disseminate so they wouldn't fight or something like that?
Well, to have a type attitude is, there and not getting a dog about why you're fighting too. But my thing about to show the wrong side of us when we got back.
Right. And then a whole lot of people from that experience came back with drug problems too, you know. That was a horrendous experience to be in. You're now then dependent upon something to make you feel a little bit better or to adapt to your situation. And alcohol was one of them. I wanted to throw a little piece on here about the alcohol thing because this is the last piece about the alcohol before we go. 10 minutes? Okay. The alcohol. Alcohol is broken down in the body, okay? Alcohol, I'm sorry I don't have something to write on here, but alcohol to acetaldehyde to acetic acid. 3 little ways. Alcohol, acetaldehyde, acetic acid. Acetic acid is harmless. You know, you go to the lab, smell it. It smells kind of sweet, something in the lab. It's the aldehyde that ain't supposed to be in your body. It's the acetaldehyde that gives you the toxic feeling and the hangover effect. It ain't supposed to be in the body. If there's a problem with an enzyme to break it down into making it harmless, that's why people get sick. So a lot of Asians don't have the right enzymes like aldehyde dehydrogenase to break down the aldehyde to something that's harmless. So they then succumb more to intoxicating effects of alcohol than others. There are certain types of drinks. So maybe they give us the malt liquors, they think that we need the dark body drinks. Whereas Europeans drinking that scotch and all that other stuff that is so much dark body, giving them a different experience. But the thing about the alcohol is NutraSweet, which is aspartame. Do not take that stuff. Yes.
There was a study a couple of years ago by the American Cancer Society, and they showed a correlation between blacks and certain types of cancers. Okay. In specific, you know, some lung and throat cancers blacks were having, and they were saying that it was a combination of things that we were consuming, specifically the type of alcohol, including malt liquor, and the type of cigarettes that we smoke, relationship to the type that Caucasians smoke and drunk. And I mean, it was like one of the most telling factors about some of the cancers that, you know, African Americans are dying from, that we're more susceptible to. Even though European Caucasians have more types of, you know, they end up having more types of cancers. African Americans have fewer cancer, but more deadly forms of it.
No question.
Die much at a higher rate than Europeans as a result of cancer that we were. And I mean, it was in black and white. And I mean, it was like, at the time, I read 2 or 3 different newspapers, and I kept up with a lot of things. And like, I mean, it was so apparent that this information would help so many people, you know, if not change their minds about what they were doing, at least be informed about what they were doing. But I mean, it was like so little said about it. Yeah. So, I mean, and it was a big study. I mean, a lot of research went into this. And I mean, a lot of the authorities that, you know, control what is going to be, you know, exposed to the public, you know, weren't, you know, pushing this information so that we would get it.
Yeah.
And, you know, going back to the conspiracy thing, I mean, just a couple other names that you can throw in of, you know, black people who are a threat to the system, who died young and mysteriously, you know, Bob Marley being one, and Arthur Ashe being another one.
Say the thing about Bob Marley too. They said he had stubbed his toe playing soccer, and then he had to get some treatment, and he then developed melanoma, cancer, right? So from what treatment from his toe? The other one you said was Arthur Ashe. Said he died of what? AIDS. I think his was from what? Blood transfusion.
Blood transfusion. As a result of a heart attack that he had, you know, while he was playing tennis. I mean, and there was no. I mean, it's like these mysterious things were happening to the. And another brother, Robinson, that used to be the news anchor for Max Robinson, who
ABC.
And if you look into what these people were doing at the time, all of them were, you know, involved in a pan-African movement.
They're activists.
Yeah, they were activists, you know, and they were involved in a pan-African movement that really, you know, threatened, you know, the powers that be, because like the positions that they held, they could get to a lot of people and, you know, spread a lot of information.
That's what I'm saying. I try to stay incognito so people don't, you know too much about where you're coming from and what you're talking about, because people fear revolution. All this is change. change for the betterment of mankind. But some people, again, we have diabolical minds to maintain a megalomaniac viewpoint that is to control the world. Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to say that as far as those who are in like the sports arena, especially fields of athletics, okay, these people have access to your body. They have access to your blood. You know, they have access to the very things, and so when they can easily control you. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
They take your blood. They have their private doctors, their private physicians that they send you to, and you just really can't afford to be too activist oriented because they are so close to you. So that the Muhammad Ali's, the one who was very pro-black, you know, they had to shut him up.
Yeah.
You know, he was a threat. And it was also brought to my attention about the change of Michael Jordan.
Right.
See, a lot of people don't know. Now, this is just, I don't have the evidence, but I have friends. They, you know, these people are cloning. They're talking about cloning now, but they've been doing it.
Yeah.
So they put humans on the planet. But they were saying about the situation about when Michael Jordan's father got killed and he went into retirement. And that when he came back, you know, there's people who have studied this man's career and he wasn't the same person. So you have to realize these people can make another one of you. They can take your blood, especially, and so now they're doing this thing with most of the athletes now. You notice that they're getting a lot of the blacks out of it, and they're bringing in these Cubans, Dominicans, and stuff. But they can make another you.
Yeah, that's true.
They can make. They don't need us no more. They got everything from us that they need. You see what I'm saying? So you have to know that you put yourself in a very vulnerable position when you go out for these fields and you give these people access to your body because they know the melanin and the superior genetics that you carry around, that's a dollar sign.
Yeah.
And you know, and I've got tapes with Dr. Sabi and Jewel Prukram that tells you that the new gold rush for this century is going to be the human organs that come from us and melanin.
That Michael Jordan piece, there's a sister from North Carolina who talked about when Michael Jordan, when he was with Chicago Bulls, jumped from the foul line and flew and then dunked the ball, they said he's on drugs. Went through all kinds of tests. So at that point, like you said, if they're analyzing and studying and we don't know what's going on, who knows what information they utilize to go ahead and exploit that individual or make sure that he ain't going to go to another level, even though he really did in terms of the masses of money that he's accumulated, he makes, and his aura. But quite clearly, they understood that at that point. I certainly would have known anything about anybody studying him because of that. It was just a normal feat. When you start talking about looking at African people doing events, like sporting events, I was sitting there watching some college football with some white family, and the white guy was saying, you know, about some athletic move. I'm already talking to him about the black quarterbacks just revolutionized the game. So he's like, well, they're just good athletes. So I mean, there's okay, fine. Black guy goes down the sideline, catches the ball. Instead of going out of bounds, he threw the ball to his man who was running behind him, and the man went and ran for touchdown. The white guy said, man, that was athletic. I said, no, that was intelligent. A different perspective on the same thing.
That's right.
So for us, athletics, intelligence, it all goes hand in hand.
That's right.
So in terms of how the body works in a quicker fashion, it's because of the chemicals that are in there. And some of the chemicals that lead to make melanin are some of the very important chemicals that I'm trying to focus on right here. With NutraSweet, it's considered to be 3 molecules: phenylalanine, aspartic acid, and methyl alcohol. And how I'm relating this to the alcohol story is that I told you alcohol breaks down to acetic acetaldehyde and then to acetic acid. It's the aldehyde that's a problem. Look at this. Methyl alcohol is converted into formaldehyde. You know what formaldehyde is?
Preserved.
That's an embalming fluid. So acetaldehyde, it's the stuff that gives you the hangover. That shouldn't be in your body. That's why you got the hangover. The formaldehyde. Here you got NutraSweet creating formaldehyde. Well, what is this phenylalanine? Phenylalanine is a chemical that's needed to make melanin. Phenylalanine to tyrosine, leading to L-dopa, dopamine, leading to what makes melanin. It makes things in the brain and also makes things in the skin. White folks love that Diet Coke. That stuff is nasty. What does it contain? Are they getting a rush off of this? You know what I mean? We already have our system functioning at a certain level. We're now eating diets that the white man's created for us. So you look at phenylalanine, something that's created to be sweet.
Even your children's sweets these days, like candies and certain candy bars, it's got the NutraSweet in them.
So pay attention to it and don't buy that stuff because eventually, they say, you're putting in toxic stuff. There's a disorder, have it in the books, PKU, phenylketonuria. It's a genetically passed on disease, but it's recessive, which means it can be corrected by the diet. If you have too much phenylalanine in the body, do you know what happens? People can become mentally retarded. Their skin lightens because it's no longer what leading to the pathways that make what melanin. That's a serious problem. So if you're talking about a genetic disorder from too much of it, what's happening when you're drinking it all the time? People drink it for breakfast, they drink it for lunch, they drink it for dinner, they drink it all day long. And I hope y'all ain't drinking that stuff. Just leave it on that. All right? Good talk.